Feeling a little unsettled and stressed with the way things are in our world? Experience the peace of Jesus with Finding Peace, our 5-day devotional. Visit purposely.com to sign up. Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we are joined by President and CEO of CareNet, Roland Warren. Thank you for being here with us.
Glad to be with you. Thanks so much for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation, Roland, because you work in an area that here in the Northwest, we have a lot of conversations about the value of the unborn and how to handle policies that might be antithetical to Christian biblical beliefs, but also how to love people who are actively walking in places of life where they need hope, they need help, and how do we meet them there? And the organization CareNet has been amazing here in the Northwest, both for Anna and I and our journey with kids, but also for people we know and love. So would you just start off the conversation by telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and then how you got to working with CareNet and what work CareNet does?
Okay, sure. No problem. I'm married. I've got two adult sons, and my wife, Yvette, is a physician. We've been married for 43 years. So I'll start there in terms of, sort of my story, and came to CareNet about 13 years ago. It'll be 13 years in October after spending about 11 years at an organization called National Fatherhood Initiative. CareNet's a ministry started in 1975 by Francis Schaeffer, C. Everett Koop, a theologian named Harold O.J. Brown, and Billy Graham was involved. It was really focused on trying to get Protestants or evangelicals involved in the life issue. At the time, pretty much Catholics were sort of carrying the water on the issue, and Protestants and evangelicals were certainly their voices were muted, if at all. And frankly, some of the denominations were pro-choice. Harold O.J. Brown kind of brought the folks together and started an organization called the Christian Action Council, which at the time was really focused more on political advocacy, really trying to restrict abortion, reduce abortions, and as time went on, Christians started forming pregnancy centers across the country to really be a alternative to abortion and the abortion providers, if you will. And as this network of pregnancy centers began to grow, they came to Christian Action Council and said, "Hey, we need help, we need support, we need training, we need cover, we need all that kind of stuff." And they started a project called the Care Network, which was to kind of help foster this group of pregnancy centers. And then that began to grow. And then in 1999, Christian Action Council decided to kind of change its name to CareNet and then focus on the care side of the issue as opposed to the advocacy side. So we have about 1,200 plus pregnancy centers in the U.S. and Canada. We have a national hotline for women and men facing pregnancy decisions, and a robust initiative focused on helping churches get more engaged through our church engagement perspective, and post-abortion training and healing through our abortion recovery and care ministry platform. And then also this year we integrated another ministry in called ICU Mobile, which are medical mobile units. So think about a pregnancy center, but on an RV, so to speak. And so we'll go into a community and offer limited medical support, ultrasounds, client advocates to kind of reach out to folks who are facing pregnancy decisions. And we're hopeful to continue to expand and grow that. So it's really just a robust perspective here, offering compassion, hope, help, and linking people to the discipleship that comes through the church. And that's a core part of our ministry model and what we're about.
Absolutely love that. And listeners, I would just like to double down on this. My wife and I, our first pregnancy with our son Daniel was super complicated. And the first thing the doctor said to us, in thinking he was being empathetic, was basically like, "Hey, you should just hit the reset button now." And it is when you are in the darkness of knowing this isn't a viable human. It was really, really dark. And we had a lovely family friend who works with CareNet who brought us in and did ultrasounds and let us hear the heartbeat and just let us have the human connection of like, there is a person here and you may or may not ever get to meet him, but like, let's just at least establish the reality that we're talking at and operating in. It was an amazing, horrible experience for us, and was because of compassionate, amazing people. We were able to meet Daniel. He did live 10 minutes. We did not get the miracle we asked for. We got the miracle God has. He's with Jesus, and that's incredible, and we're so grateful. But CareNet was huge. And so just for those listening, if you know people who get pregnant as teenagers and don't know where to go, as single moms and don't know where to go, or just their husbands or fathers, they don't know what to do with their emotions, their feelings, CareNet is an awesome soft space to land. They're not going to shout at you, blame you, yell at you, or just truth bomb you with the Bible. They will be hands and feet for Christ. So you wrote a book, Roland, The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life. What do you mean by being pro-abundant life? Because abundant is now kind of inserted between pro and life, which many of us would agree with. Yeah, pro-life. These are people. They have souls. Like, we need to be pro-life. What are you getting to when you say pro-abundant life?
Yeah, it really comes from John 10:10, where Christ said, I came that you might have life and have that life abundantly. You can be an atheist and be pro-life, but you can't be an atheist and be pro-abundant life. And my sort of perspective was, well, gosh, as Christians, we should be linking our why statement to Jesus's why statement, why he came. And therefore, there's a very specific call so that, we should be working so that not just to save heartbeats, but that those heartbeats will be heaven bound. The other reason why that it's so important, the term pro-life, I ask people all the time, I'm not really even sure what it means. Because, you have someone who says, well, I'm pro-life, and you say, why? Well, I believe that the circumstances of a child's conception and birth should not determine its humanity and worth. And so whether you're conceived in love or lust, or whether you're planned or unplanned, or whether you have some fetal abnormality or whatever it may be, it doesn't change that you're alive, that the fact that you're alive is intrinsically tied to Imago Dei, that you're creating the image of God. Right. And you're worthy of protection as a result of that. And that's what you and your wife kind of walk through in that process. So that's one person. And then the other person, well, I'm pro-life too. Okay, so what about you? Well, I'm for a 15-week ban. All right, well, how many abortions happen before 15 weeks? Well, according to CDC, about 96%. So you're okay with abortion in 96% of the cases. What about you? Well, I'm pro-life too, and I'm pain capable or against late-term abortions, which is roughly 20 weeks. Okay, how many abortions happen before 20 weeks? Well, about 99%. You're pro-life too. Yes, I'm pro-life too. So what you see is that all those perspectives now are considered, quote, pro-life. And the reality is that we took an issue that's binary and we made it kind of flexible. It's on a continuum, if you will. So in many ways, like when somebody tells me that they're pro-life, I have to ask them, well, what do you mean by that? You've got to think about being pro-life, and that's why I said pro-abundant life, from the perspective of the baby, right?
Yeah.
So there's a need for a word, a framework that really ties this issue to Imago Dei, ties it to Jesus's why statement, why he came, that we might have life and life abundantly. If life begins at conception, that means that he wants abundant life for those in the womb, and he wants abundant life for those outside the womb. And so a pro-abundant life perspective links those two things together.
So can you set the stage for us? What is the situation in America with abortions? A couple years ago now, 2 years. We have the Dobbs decision. This is a massive overturn of the political norms in our country. People have been praying for this and working for this. We've given billions of dollars to political efforts to see a movement swell to the point where we can actually get protection for the unborn. So one, what was the situation like before? Two, what is the situation like in terms of abortions and protections for the unborn since? And three, what could it look like to move forward in a country where some of us recognize like we can't be killing the unborn and truly have abundant life?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we've seen the abortion numbers go up since Roe was overturned. It's unfortunate that that's happened, but 63% of abortions now are through the abortion pill, and certainly COVID helped assist that because the Biden administration basically took off all the most of the restrictions, if you will, around the pill. So now you can get it in the mail. When it first was kind of brought into the public square, I think you had to have 3 visits with an OBGYN, a follow-up visit, an ultrasound, all these different things, and now you don't have to have any visits, no ultrasound. And it's incredibly dangerous, for women, because 1% of pregnancies are ectopic pregnancies, which are in the fallopian tubes.
Mm.
And if you're not getting an ultrasound and you're taking the abortion pill, which is supposed to be used up until 10 weeks, and you're not seeing an OBGYN, there's an issue. And in fact, there was a recent study that came out that talked about the serious adverse reaction that so many women have had to the abortion pill. But there's an aspect of this that, frankly, in my view, is not the main reason why we should restrict the abortion pill and not have the abortion pill. The real reason that there's a problem with the abortion pill is because it kills babies. That is the distinction between this advocating on this issue based on a political narrative, which is really like abortion hurts women, which is kind of more of a political argument. You got to raise it another level to the moral conversations. We need to not have the abortion pill because the pill kills children. So that's why, from my standpoint, this notion of being pro-abundant life is so much more important, because a pro-life perspective often leads you to the polls, to a political outcome. But a pro-abundant life perspective leads you to the cross. Pastors must lead. The Christian body must lead. And we have to exchange the podium for the pulpit. And right now, in a lot of ways, the podium, which is the kind of a political narrative, is sort of leading even the Christian response for so many, when the reality is that we need to have a biblical perspective, the pulpit, if you will, which has Imago Dei and John 10:10 and the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, all these other issues connected to it, should be leading on this issue. You'll get more protection for the child, and you actually win the political narrative too, because if you lose the pews, you lose the polls. And that's what we've seen in a lot of these referendums.
So then I'm hearing you say that we can't simply ban the abortion pill and have all of our problems go away then.
No, I don't think so, because, let me say that better. If you ban the abortion pill, right, that certainly will deal with medical abortions, pill-based abortions, but we still have surgical abortions. So my point is, all these things are important to do. Banning the abortion pill, absolutely very important. Restricting surgical abortion, all that stuff's important. But the reality is, I always tell people, like when Roe got overturned, people would ask me, before Roe got overturned, rather, people would ask me, well, when is Roe going to be overturned? Is it going to happen? And I would tell them all the time, well, Roe gets overturned every day. Every day.
Yeah.
A woman could have an abortion, chooses not to. Like your wife, she overturned Roe. So what does that tell you? The power is that once you transform the heart, abortion can be perfectly legal, but it'll be unthinkable. And if it's unthinkable, even if it's legal, people won't do it. So again, the higher thing versus the lower thing. So I said being pro-abundant life. Well, how do you do that? What are the two pillars that kind of hold up a pro-abundant life roof? And this is what's actually, I lay out in great detail in my book, The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life. There's two pillars that hold up kind of the pro-abundant life roof. And one of the first is God's design for family, which is kind of built off of this notion of what happened with Jesus in the first chapter, the first book of the New Testament, and God's call to discipleship. 87% of the women that have abortions are unmarried, right? So what you see is that the sanctity of marriage and the sanctity of marriage and family and the sanctity of life are connected, right? And so I always tell people, and I start with the birth of Christ. You had Mary facing an unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective, and she has hopes for her life, dreams for her life, right? An angel comes to her and says, "What? That you're going to conceive and bear a child." And she says, what does she do? She says she doesn't focus on the uncertainty of what she doesn't know. She focuses on the certainty of what she does. There's a life growing inside of her, not a life worth sacrificing. And she says, "Let it be unto me, you have said," and she chooses life. But what did God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy wasn't a crisis pregnancy? Sent an angel to Joseph. And Joseph had a plan, which was to divorce her quietly, which is how they did abortions back then. You put the woman and the baby away. Angel comes to him and calls him to do two very specific things. The first thing is, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. In other words, Joseph becomes a husband for Mary and a father for Jesus. Well, that model that you see is actually very much connected to contemporarily what happens now. So many women, the reason they want to have abortions is because they don't have a guy who says, "I'll be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you." So she feels at risk. The whole abortion decision is about 9 months and 1 second. All that missing support. If she can't see how she's going to be able to take care of this child, she's much more likely to have that abortion, you see? So you have the sanctity of marriage and family, which is that first pillar. So we have to also be building strong families, because when you build strong families, when you connect men to this issue and you get more men to tap into their inner Joseph, while you're trying to get women to tap into their inner Mary, guess what happens? She's more likely to give the child life. So the first pillar of a pro-abundant life perspective is God's design for family. The second pillar is God's call to discipleship, which is the role of the church. In other words, the church seeing the life issue not primarily through a political lens, but seeing it through a discipleship lens. When you view it as a discipleship issue, then it's not an issue that you care about once every 4 years during an election cycle, or even once a year during Sanctity of Life Sunday. Because what? We're called to make disciples every day. So it's sanctity of life every day. So you see the woman facing an unplanned pregnancy, your first thought's not who do I need to vote for that she can't have an abortion, right? Or what kind of material support she needs. Your first thought is, she needs to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when you think about it that way, guess what? It's the higher thing versus the lower thing. If you're a disciple maker, you'll help meet the material needs that she has. You'll help connect that father in. You'll mentor them, help them build a godly marriage. If you view it through a discipleship, you will be politically engaged. Why? Because we're called to help the vulnerable, right? And we know that the government is more likely unjust, unmerciful to whom? The most vulnerable. So it frames political engagement and material support under the discipleship call, which we have. So you see, it's a pro-abundant life perspective. God's design for family and God's call to discipleship. And when you link those two things together, you get this pro-abundant life perspective that I'm talking about, where children are brought into the world, families are formed to be disciples who make disciples who live and love like Jesus. You're more likely to change what's happening on the life issue if the church leads, but the church is only going to lead if the church sees the issue through the lens of the call of the church, which is to make disciples, which is the Great Commission.
Yeah, I love that. And making the rules that reflect that, not that drive it.
And that's my point. That's why
I love it.
You're supposed to take the perspective from the cross to the polls.
Right.
Right. So that's why the pro-abundant life for a second leads you to the cross, and then you take that perspective to the polls. Yeah. But if you start at the polls and then take that perspective to the cross, in other words, to the church, that's what we have with too many people. They're not starting with the biblical narrative, like God's design for family, God's call to discipleship, living out the Great Commandment to fulfill the Great Commission, and then taking that perspective into the voting booth. They're taking the perspective of the culture, a political narrative, right, of exceptions and this and weeks and all that stuff, and then they're taking that to the church and saying, well, this is what we should advocate for because this is what's possible. The role of the church is to say, we're not talking about what's possible, we're talking about what's right.
Yeah, which brings us to, speaking of change, because I absolutely love your point of it's not happening in the polls, it's happening in the pulpit, or the podium, it's the pulpit, that we need to be going to the cross and then taking the truth of the gospel, that we're all sinners in need of grace and mercy, and then extending that in truth and love of like, these are human lives, we love them and we love you. We want you to be a strong family. We want you to be a strong follower of Christ in the family of Christ. How do we do it? Because what I see is we get pumped up about this topic. There are some very clear black and white issues. We're dealing with life and death, humans. So it travels very well over social media, for example. Where and how can we participate in the conversation, or can we, I guess, should be the greater question. I mean, gospel tech is about using the best tech well. So how do we participate in this conversation in a way that reflects Christ and is helpful? And what should we avoid that's just harmful to what you just called of reaching people where they're at and bringing Christ to them as the hands and feet of Christ?
Yeah, no, I think that, obviously, I always talk about, the woman at the well and how Jesus went to the woman at the well, because that was the place where you would meet the vulnerable. That's the place that you would meet them. And where would Jesus go today? He'd probably be the woman. It wouldn't be the woman at the well. It'd be the woman, on Instagram or something like that, right? So, right. So we have to bring that message into the wells of today. But you have to bring a message that's consistent with what Christ did when you look at how he engaged the woman at the well, right? She had physical, emotional, spiritual, and social needs, and he engaged her in all of that context in order for her to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. So I think that the technologies out there, like the message that we are communicating through whatever technology mechanism you're using, has to communicate that. And I think the other thing is, you've got to be thoughtful about which formats, if you will, you're using to communicate that message. I have this one framework I use called the 4 M's of effective communication: the message, the messenger, the method, and the moment. A lot of times we know what it is we want to say, but are we thoughtful about what method we're using in order to do that? And whether we're the right ones to deliver that message. So, if you have the right message, but the wrong method, then that's a problem. So is this something that should come over text, or should be an email, or should be Instagram, or should be a voice call, or should be like when I was growing up, we just had 3 ways of communicating. You met somebody in person, you wrote them a letter, or you called them on the phone. Couldn't even leave messages, right? So I think from a technology standpoint, a lot of people aren't as thoughtful about this. And the other piece that I would make is that, and you think about problems, like there's simple problems, complicated problems, and complex problems. A simple problem is like a pegboard, right? Like, putting the peg in the hole, right? It's what's called a known. So you know what you got, you know where it needs to go. A complicated problem is like a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, right? It's basically known unknowns. In other words, I know how many pieces I have. I know there's 1,000 pieces. I just don't know where they go. And then you have complex problems, and those are unknown unknowns, right? Unknown problems are ones that you don't know what you don't know. Human interactions are complex. That's why when people say, oh, our relationship is complicated. Actually, it's not. It's complex. And so I do think that this issue is a complex issue. And complex issues are best solved in relationships. How do you know that? Sin is a complex problem. And what did God do to solve the complex problem? He sent Jesus. Jesus came, Emmanuel, God with us. So I really think in terms of like technology and all these things, I think that this is where the problem comes in, is that given that sin is a complex problem and given that abortion is a sin, the only way you're going to solve it is in relationships with each other. And as you're thinking about technology, like the message, the messenger, the method, and the moment, if you're going to engage on this issue, particularly with someone who's facing a pregnancy decision, an abortion decision, you've got to be thinking about what type of technology you're going to use, whether it's personal interactions or whatever, in order to do that, because you're dealing not with a simple issue, not with a complicated issue, but with a complex issue. And unfortunately, a lot of the technology that we have today is designed to deal with simple issues or complicated issues, but it's not designed to deal with complex issues, because complex issues are best solved in relationships. So, from my standpoint, I encourage people to engage around this issue is, kind of use the technology. You have to find the resources out there to help put you in relationship with people who are facing pregnancy decisions. Like we have a resource called Making Life Disciples, which you can use your technology to find at makinglifedisciples.com. And what that's designed to do is to help churches to be equipped, the small groups in churches to be equipped to be in relationship with someone who's facing a pregnancy decision, whether they're coming from a pregnancy center or whether they're coming from the church itself. 54% of women who have abortions profess to be Catholic or Protestant. They're in the church. You have a woman sitting in a pew right next to you who's facing a pregnancy decision. Use your technology in order to get yourself trained so that you can be in relationship, knee to knee, with that woman facing a pregnancy decision, or that man who's supporting a decision, right? Help that couple form a strong marriage, help them, around the resources that they need. Life decisions need life support. And that life support comes from interactions, personal relationships. And so from my standpoint, that's the piece that's where the limitation of some of the technology can come from, if you will. It can be like saying, be well and be fed. The reality is, you're going to need to use your technology to get into a relationship, into community, to help build strong families, to live out a pro-abundant life perspective.
That's amazing. And that is then the alternative to abortion, that instead of hitting that reset button and trying to make everything go back to what it was, to recognize, man, we do this in relationship, we do this in our brokenness, and that God is good over it and through it, even when we do the wrong thing, even when we do the wrong thing on purpose. I love that. So you said it in there, and I just want to make sure that in closing this conversation for our listeners, that we put a real pin in this. If there was just one thing you would have everyone who listens to this do this week, what one thing would you encourage them to either think about, pray about, go out and do, search using their technology? What would you have for us?
Yeah, no, I really would. I mean, you can obviously check out CareNet, which is care-net.org, and you can learn more about what we're doing. But specifically for folks in the church, I just encourage you, go to makinglifedisciples.com. If you're a part of a small group in the church, get your small group trained so that they can come alongside someone facing a pregnancy decision. There's only roughly, 2,600, somewhere between 2,600 and 3,000, depending on who's counting, pregnancy centers in this country for women and men facing pregnancy decisions who are looking for an alternative that way. We've got over 350,000 churches, right? At least half of them are life affirming. Imagine if every one of those churches had a ministry on-ramp, so that if someone was facing a pregnancy decision in the church, there's a ministry on-ramp to meet them at their point of need. Or someone who's coming from a pregnancy center could call a church and say, I've got Janie here who's facing a pregnancy decision and needs that support, right? That you could come alongside her. And even if she makes the abortion decision, you still need to come alongside her. Why? Because even if she chooses abortion, we still are called to make disciples in the same way that Peter, that aborted Jesus, because an abortion is a rejection of vulnerable life. He aborted Jesus. I don't know you. He rejected the way, the truth, and the life, right? What did Jesus do? He restored him, right? So we are called to be in community with these people, in relationship with these people. But that only happens if you unplug yourself, like the movie Matrix, from being pro-life and thinking about this primarily through a political narrative, and plug yourself into being pro-abundant life, where you see it's God's design for family, God's call to discipleship, living out the great commandment to fulfill the great commission for those that are at risk for abortion. As we do that, then you start to see the transformation first in the church and then in the broader culture.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. For all the people that have already made this decision, that when we bring this up in our churches, and as we make this a conversation with our pastoral teams, as we talk about bringing these resources in, that we're doing it with the understanding that there are hurt and broken people. Maybe it was pre-believer, maybe it was while they were trusting Jesus, and that was just a moment of fear, and much like Peter, to recognize that, man, there's a lot of brokenness when we begin to address this topic, which is why a lot of churches don't address it well. So thank you so much, Roland, for this conversation. So listeners, Roland has his book, The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life. You can find it on Amazon. Roland, where can we find more resources about your book, about your work in CareNet?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. You can find my book on Amazon. You can go to my website, which is Roland, ROLANDC, Warren, WARREN.com. And you can learn more about, kind of what I'm doing. And I've got some other books around fatherhood and some other things as well. And then you can come and learn more about CareNet at care-net.org, care-net.org, to be a part of the pro-abundant life movement. So appreciate it. And thanks for having me on, Nathan.
Oh, thank you for being here. We'll put all those links in the show notes. And thank you again for being here, Roland. And listeners, thank you for being a part of this. I am praying that this equips you to go out and love those who need the greatest hope and the greatest help as they make those life choices. And we pray that they will make the choice for raising young people with full, abundant lives. Thank you for your time, Roland.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks for listening. We just wanted to take a minute to let you know that just like you and your family, Purposely is also part of a family, the Krista family of ministries. Krista helps kids and teens learn and grow in their faith at King Schools and Miracle Ranch Camp. And Krista shares Jesus with people in the poorest, most remote places through World Concern. Krista Senior Living is a community of love and care, and Krista Media is a place of hope on the radio. God is changing lives through these 5 ministries, and Krista is on mission to share the good news of Jesus. To learn more, visit Krista.org.